I'll demonstrate now how to configure a DHCP scope. So what we've done so far is to install the DHCP service and went through the post-installation steps of creating the DHCP groups and authorizing the server. The next thing that we have to do is to configure our scope with the options that we would like to assign to clients when they request DHCP addresses. So this particular computer is in a network of 1×168.20 network, which is a class C network, and the entire range of that network is the first IP address being 1, which is assigned to this computer, and the last IP address in the range would be 254. So these are the usable IP addresses that will be available in this class C network. So I'll put up here usable IP addresses in the range. But within this range, I would like to exclude a number of addresses ranging from 192.168.20.1 to 192.168.20.20. And the reason is why I want to exclude this range is that the DHCP server should never assign to any requesting client the IP address from 1 all the way to 20. I'm saying that do not assign to DHCP client. So this range here, or this set of IP addresses, will be in my excluded range. Now the server IP address is assigned as 1×168.20.1. I don't have a router in this network, but I'm going to assume that I have a router with an IP address of 1×168.20.20. Okay, so in order to create this scope, I can click on the DHCP service that's available on the in the dashboard. Right click on the server that's running the DHCP service, and then click on DHCP Manager. So this here will open up the DHCP Manager. Let's expand that. And this is my server here that has been installed with the DHCP service. So I have two listings here, one for the IPv4 and the other is for IPv6. So the one that I'm going to be working with is the IPv4. IPv6 is also there, but I'm not going to do any work on that. I'm just going to work in the IPv4. So currently I don't have a scope. So the first thing is to create my scope. So the scope will really represent the IP addresses and all the settings that will be assigned, or that I want to assign to clients that request IP addresses in this network. So in order to create a scope, I have to right click on the IPv4 and then click on new scope. And it opens up the wizard, and let's see what it asks for. So I have to name the scope. Now, you can name the scope anything that that you want to. You can just call it scope 1. And just give it a friendly description so that you know more or less the purpose of the DHCP scope. Now you can, let's say for example you have multiple VLANs and you're creating a scope for to assign IP addresses to say clients in VLAN 10 or VLAN 20. You probably want to label it accordingly. So for example, I can just call this VLAN-20 and I can give it a description. I'm just going to leave a description out. I can always say here that IP addresses for network 20 or for VLAN 20. I'll just leave the description out for now, and I'll go ahead and click on next. And here's where I'm asked for. I'm being asked for the start of the IP address. Now I'm gonna go ahead and enter the start IP. So according to my document that I have here, my usable IP, or the range of my IP address, will start from 1×168.20.1, and the last IP will be 254. So I'll go ahead and enter that. So 192.168.20.1, and the end IP can be 192.168.20.254. So I'm using the entire range in my Class C network, and it automatically will assign a subnet mask here. of 255.255.255.0. Okay. Now this subnet mask, if you enter a different IP address, for example, if you're trying to use a different network range and you want to change the subnet mask, maybe make it for example a /25 or /26 network, then you can specify whatever subnet mask corresponds to your network. In my case, I'm using the full range of the class C, so I'm just going to leave it as a default class C network as 255.255.255. Then I'll go ahead and click on next. And here's where it asks for the exclusion range. So my exclusion range now will be starting from 192.168.20.1 to 168.20.20. So any IP address within this range from 1 to 20 will be excluded from the range and will not be assigned to any requesting client. So I'll go ahead and add that 192.168.20.1 to .20. Okay, it gives you a description here that the excluded IP addresses will not be offered to any clients. Okay, then go ahead, click next, and leave this as the default, the least duration. So the least duration means that this is the amount of time that an IP address will be given to a client, and if the client does not request for a renewal of the IP address, then the DHCP server, once it does not receive a request for renewing the IP address that has been assigned to a client, then the DHCP server will know that, okay, it needs to remove this IP address from the entry that's associated with the particular device that it was assigning it to, and it will now recycle that IP address to be assigned to a new device that requests for an IP address. So this least duration, you leave it at 8 as the default. Click on next, and it asks for now to configure DHCP options. Now I don't want to do the options. I will actually come back to this to show you some of the options that you can assign with this DHCP, and then you can so I'm gonna just select this option where it says I want to configure these options later, and click on next, and then finish. So now that my scope has been created, you can actually see the name of the scope here, and that's the network it is servicing, the 192.168.20.0 network. And notice that there's a little arrow that actually like a little red arrow that shows me something. So that indicates that there's something wrong with the scope. So after creating the scope, the next thing that I have to do is to activate the scope. So the scope is not activated until you choose to activate the scope. So what this means that although you have the scope created and it's ready to service client, it will not actually activate. It will not be responding to any requests unless the scope has been activated. So in order to activate the scope, you just right click on the scope that you want to activate and just click on this option that says activate. So once you activate the scope, now you see that there is like a green check mark next to IPv4. It means that the scope has been activated and it's ready. We now have this server in our network, and it's ready to respond to requests from DHCP clients, and it can start handing out the IP addresses along with any other settings that we configure in our DHCP. If you look at the address pool here, it will show you the range of addresses from 192.168.20.1 to 192.168.20.254. That's my range. And this is the range that it will exclude. Now I don't have any address leases because I don't have any client requesting any addresses from this server at the moment, and I don't have any reservations. But I'll come back and show you in another session how you can add reservations. And under scope options, we have nothing. So that's the next thing that I'm going to be configuring to show you how to configure the scope options in the DHCP scope that we have created.